Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I want to thank my friends at Hatch for producing this episode. You can get unlimited podcast editing and strategy for one flat rate by visiting hatch.fm. All right, let's get into the show. Welcome to Distribution First, the show where we flip content marketing on its head and focus on what happens after you hit publish. Each week, I share playbooks, motivations, stories, and strategies to help you repurpose and distribute your content because you deserve to get the most out of everything you create. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Distribution First. Fun to have another second-time guest on, Mason Cosby, although in a completely different situation than the last time he was on. So if you're a longtime listener, Mason was on last year when he was still at Sales Assembly, running content and demand gen over there. And we were, talking about how he's using AI and all that type of stuff. It was a really fun podcast. But now Mason is running his own thing, Scrappy ABM. And so I actually thought, have Mason come on and we're going to do a little bit of a live coaching session here to help him out. It was funny, he was saying after, which is, honestly the truth, even with the folks I have conversations with, it's like, it's the cobbler's shoes scenario where everybody else has really good shoes, but you're not always able to practice it yourself. So Mason, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, Justin, super excited to be here. And I was putting some thoughts together this morning. So I'm excited for you to lovingly rip me to shreds and help me figure out how I can build a better content strategy.
Awesome, man. So, let's just get started there a little bit. For me, I know a little bit about what you're going on, but I'm sure you've got different things going too. So why don't you just tell me a little bit about like where you're currently at, what you're currently producing from a content perspective and kind of what's going on there?
Yeah. So I am a prolific podcast guest. So I end up doing in the ballpark of 1 to 3 podcast interviews on a weekly basis. So I'm shooting to do ideally about 100 interviews this year. And that essentially helps to clarify and form for me. I'm actually a pretty significant verbal processor. So for me, I really enjoy the podcast guest experience because I have somebody else that doesn't know what I do ask me questions about what I do and how we do it. And it allows me the opportunity to get live real-time feedback. So that's a lot of what we do for a content strategy. It's just like trying to show up as many places as possible. It accomplishes a lot on my side. And then what that generally turns into is people will repurpose the clips for us. They'll give us the transcript and I can repurpose that into social content. And admittedly, on the transcript side of things, I do need to be better about like actually looking at the transcripts and repurposing it. I've done that a couple of times, but most mornings I just kind of wake up and I'm like, what am I thinking about? And then I post about that, which used to work a lot better when I was primarily a marketer, but now I'm actually like primarily a business owner speaking to marketers. So the learning and public strategy still works, but I need to talk about client learnings versus like my own personal learning. So like I'm still striking the balance there on the LinkedIn content side of things. And then the last piece is I do a weekly interview. I used to live stream it, but I've now had some, like, it's good, but it's actually a fair bit of travel that's popped up. I'm going to a fair number of events where I get the opportunity to speak. So like the consistency on a live stream every single week has gotten much more difficult. But I do a weekly guest interview where I'm interviewing somebody on their playbooks. So the super high level strategy is I show up prolifically as a guest. I post every day on LinkedIn, probably more than I should. Like sometimes it's upwards of 3 times, 4 times a day. And then I also do interviews on my own. And then you're going to hate me. So forgive me for being this person, but I've set up a SendFox account and it has my RSS feed for my podcast. So once a week, there's an automated email that goes out and sends out the podcast episodes to a list. There's about 1,000 people on that list. And again, I don't touch it. It's just entirely automated in the background. I've hired a couple of people now recently, and a part of their job duties are going to be creating a good email newsletter, both for LinkedIn and actually building up intentionally an email list. So that's really where we are right now from a content strategy perspective.
Well, I think your scaffolding is in place. There are bricks there to build a foundation around. I think email being a massive one that I think you in particular can tap into with just trying to build a little bit more of that owned audience for you.
Yep.
So it sounds like definitely like podcast being the main driver of your content, both sort of, I would say, internally, the things you're doing externally, you going on other shows, speaking kind of fits in that same realm of you going and tapping into other people's audiences, which I think is a great underrated content play. Underrated
Yep.
distribution play is you getting yourself out there onto different shows and being able to consistently, like you said, talk about Scrappy ABM. What's the process? What are we doing? Helps you refine it, even beyond just working with clients. I think my biggest thing for you as I'm thinking through this is around understanding, like, because you are in essence creating so many things, even though you're not, like, you're on those other, speeches, or you're on those other podcasts and things like that, and you're doing your own. How often you're doing a weekly live, but maybe not even a weekly live? It's kind of hit or miss right now.
So the live stream component is a little bit hit or miss, but I am still doing a weekly interview.
Okay, weekly interview. Okay.
So sometimes I just don't live stream it. So
Okay.
that is going on. And from, what I'm thinking about is transitioning that into, instead of like a weekly live stream, still doing the guest interviews, but maybe adding in a monthly webinar series that is more structured in its nature and can be repurposed for the podcast as well. But what I'm finding is when I live stream it, I like live streaming for a variety of reasons. It does notify everybody in my LinkedIn network, hey, Mason's doing a podcast episode, which there's value in that alone. And then additionally, from an editing perspective, guests are on whenever you live stream generally, because they know, like, this is it. So I could make a mistake right now, and then for lack of better, be like, I hated that, I'm going to run that back. And from an editing perspective, don't get me wrong, I want the guest to create the best content, but also, Scrappy ABM is running 9 other shows as an organization. So the least amount of time that we can spend editing my own stuff with the same team is better, because I want to make sure that we deliver most effectively for clients. So that's kind of the thought process that I had. But again, just the inconsistency that I'm going to be able to provide, because I was live streaming on Tuesdays, but now I do a lot of speaking that's like on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday from an event perspective. So like I was at B2BMX, I was there Monday through Wednesday. In April, I'm going to Golden Hour. I'll leave Tuesday, and then I'll be in New York through Wednesday. In May, I've already got another speaking engagement in Michigan. And then like there are other conferences that I'm already starting to have conversations with. So I think I'll end up traveling once a month for speaking engagements. And then like once you've done a speaking engagement, you essentially lose a week. So then the following week is catch up on all the stuff you missed last week. Plus, if you do it right, you should get a number of, like, a solid number of new sales conversations. So like essentially after every event, I lose consistency for 2 weeks because I'm catching up on what I missed. Plus now actively managing a larger pipeline. So the consistency around a live stream is just not something that I've been able to commit to.
I think that's maybe the biggest thing for you, Mason, is like what I always talk, even when I'm individually working with coaching clients or consulting clients inside an org, is let's build a plan that's realistic, not one that's idealistic.
Yep.
And so for you, right, like, like if I were to put myself in your shoes, I would say, all right, it would be awesome to do a webinar series. It would be awesome to do these weekly lives. It would be awesome to do a podcast. But knowing where I'm at, what I've got going on, what are the things that I can repurpose and distribute into the feed, into the thing. Like, so for me, knowing you've got these speaking engagements coming up, it might be, all right. And again, this is where I'm a lot less, formulaic in terms of like, if you do a webinar show, you must commit to doing that webinar show for the rest of your life. If you're doing speech, like your audience doesn't really care. Like you care maybe in your brain, but for them, it's just like, oh, okay, there's a new podcast and he was giving a speech. That's cool. Oh, it's a webinar this week. That's interesting. And so I think as long as you're able to plan that out internally and feel comfortable and confident with that, like, I would almost, for the time being, allow yourself to take the weight off of having to do so much content, knowing where you're at in the business and knowing that the content you do create can fuel you'll be okay. Like if email and LinkedIn are your main channels, you'll be okay.
Yeah. So I think there's 2 things to specifically highlight. One, email is like not a good channel for us right now. So it's something that I recognize we need to build because, again, don't get me wrong, social and podcast have delivered super well. But at the end of the day, social is not an owned audience. So I need to start figuring out how to take the audience that I have on social and start to draft them into an owned space. So that's the first thing. Second thing is podcasts are incredible for depth. They are horrible for discoverability. So if I don't have the
Mm.
right promotional engines around the podcast, I'm not going to grow a show. So again, I'm just thinking through, I'm largely on LinkedIn. I have actually had a couple of times where I've lost access to a LinkedIn account just based on like, I'm a prolific connector. So like I'll use all my connection requests and they think I'm an automated bot and then I get locked out. There was actually one point a year ago where they actually deleted my account for 2 days. So I was like, cool. So I've gotten like way more intentional around the connection strategy. But I mean, I was the person that legitimately lost their LinkedIn account. That was my main source of new business. So as I continue to grow, I'm recognizing I have to build up owned channels as well. So that there's two components on that front. And then the second front is a lot of what Scrappy ABM is doing is developing a lot of action-oriented playbooks using account-based product-led tools. So when we think about ABM, it didn't have a lot of tools that you could get started with on a free tier. Whereas now you've got tools like Apollo that you can do contact enrichment and outbound sequencing with. You've got Propensity, which is an ABM platform that's dedicated to small teams, but has a free tier that gives you access to third-party intent data and target account list building. You've got Warmly that provides first-party website engagement data for free. So we're super focused around the tech partnerships that are accessible technologies for smaller teams that are trying to be scrappy and building out playbooks around those things. So actually, as we think about distribution first, no pun intended, but like we are building those playbooks already for two purposes. One, for education that will then actually feed the larger content strategy. But then two, it's actually internal process documentation as we execute for our clients. So we're just taking our internal process documentation and making it publicly accessible and then partnering with those tech vendors to create co-promoted events. So when I talk about a monthly webinar series, it's actually, that's going to be the series is here's an actionable playbook that you can go run with today. And we've got a framework that I presented at B2BMX that got like a great reception. So my whole goal is now, how do I educate that framework and then tie all of our playbooks back into our 4D framework so that I can just evangelize the concept of the 4D framework, which while we're here, data, distribution, destination, direction. If you can answer those 4 questions, then you know how to build an ABM program.
Love it. Yeah. And that's where I would focus on, even from the higher level, like when you're thinking about your content strategy, that's what I was going to say is you've got these playbooks, you've got this framework. Now it's on you to just basically run that for eternity until things change,
Yeah.
right? But the best marketers in the world are the ones who are still spouting off the same thing. That I always use StoryBrand as example. Like they have a StoryBrand framework. It's 7 steps. It's not original to story, but they built it and, it's 10 years later. It's not like they're like, oh, we've got to add an extra step. It's 2025. It's like, no, these are the 7 steps. Figure these out. You're good.
Yeah. And I think marketers suck at that because, like, if I look at another example of like Ramsey Solutions, which is in the financial personal finance education space, they've had the same 7 baby steps for 30 or 35 years. And I'm going to put it bluntly, Dave is getting kind of old. He's thought a lot about legacy planning. I can tell you it's probably going to be the same baby steps for like another 30 years.
At
because
least,
it's just like, these are the 7 steps. Like, it's just these shouldn't change unless there's something that dramatically happens. But at the end of the day, like, these are the steps.
So I think for you, and again, how I sort of teach it with the distribution first framework is once you understand your channels. So for you, you've got POV, that's your playbooks, that's your frameworks, that's the state in the world. You understand your channels, which are going to be LinkedIn as your core, email as your 2. And then for you, I think it's kind of doing that reverse engineering of like, all right, what's the weekly drumbeat for LinkedIn? And again, maybe just putting a little, and again, because I know you're probably kind of like me, like you could build a strategy for LinkedIn and be really solid, but you're also like, okay, kind of winging it. But if you figured it out to where, like you mentioned at the beginning, like wanting to do a little bit more client results or something like that, like dedicate Fridays or client result days or Mondays or client result days. And I've only got to write 4 of those posts for the upcoming month. Okay. Whose problem? Who's this? Who's that?
Yeah. And I guess my other question just to you would be more around, it feels like whenever I have largely batched my LinkedIn content, personally, it doesn't get as good of results. Whereas whenever I kind of like have a moment in time post, those get way better results for me. And when I talk about results, I don't just mean like engagement. That's nice and helpful, but it's like I actually convert more pipeline off of the like pithy 3-line post that I make on my phone versus like the very well thought out post that I sat down and wrote for 30 minutes. So like I struggle with that balance and figuring out because you're right. Like I've had the thought of like, I release a podcast episode every Monday and Thursday. So like Mondays and Thursdays should probably be podcast clips to like push the podcast. Tuesday was when I was doing my live stream. So I should push the live stream on Tuesdays. Wednesdays could be a framework or a playbook. And then Friday could just kind of be whatever. It could be client results. It could be like a weekly win or weekly fail or like, but I have the framework in my head. I just am not doing it because I'm not seeing a solid engagement and results based on that. But I also know personally that might just be like I have to I hate to put this one, like retrain my audience on what I talk about because I now talk about different things than I did a year ago. So like,
Sure.
I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that front because my engagement goes way down whenever I just post podcast clips of Scrappy ABM stuff versus like talking about nice, fun things that are a little bit random, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. I've shifted my mindset a lot. And I don't know, I can only speak for me running my own business as well. But I've sort of shifted where LinkedIn, like engagement or like lots of engagements or even lots of views, I'm not really that concerned about it in the macro. Yeah. I'm much more concerned about the ideas getting out. And so it's funny, right? Like when I started the Distribution First podcast in February of 2023, nobody on the planet that I was aware of was talking about distribution first in any way, shape, or form. I had never heard of the term distribution first because I Googled it. I looked it up. I did a bunch of research to say, like, is anybody talking about this? You want to know what people were talking about with distribution? They were talking about like shipping and, like hard goods, distributing goods across the world. Like that's what was out in the world around that. So I was like, you know what? This is cool. Now, a year later, articles are getting written with distribution first in it. There are, I see in my feed all the time, people talking about distribution first. So like, it's a little bit more qualitative, but it's also like, all right, we're starting to make some sense here and some movement here. And that only came from doing that stuff consistently. I'll even admit too, right? Like from my perspective, like, yeah, I drop a new podcast every Tuesday. I should probably be doing clips every single Tuesday. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Life gets busy, stuff changes. And so I think like having, and again, that's why I say like realistic versus ideal. Maybe you've got an ideal plan that is the one you laid out. Maybe the realistic plan takes you from 100% random to 50-50. And you're moving your way into a world where I used to randomly post every day. Well, now at least I've got it down to where 2 days a week are pretty scheduled. And and for you, I would think about like, what are those two things? Like, where's the biggest gap? And so if one of them in your mind is client wins and being able to show off a little bit more of that, for lack of a better term, like bottom of funnel, like people who might be more wanting to ramp up their ABM programs versus just like, I like Mason, I'm going to follow what he's got to say. He's super smart.
Yeah.
And, like, do it for a month, do it for 2 months. Like you're going to learn and you're going to get the data. You'll understand.
I guess my other question is, because I had a similar experience. So like I made a post about the concept of Scrappy ABM like a year and a half ago, and it did pretty well. And I Googled it. And I was like, that has a nice ring to it. Like, I wonder if anybody's ever used that exact framing. And when I Googled it, my LinkedIn post was the first thing that popped up. And I was like, aha. So like I found something. And then as I've been beating this drum, I've seen it more. But I guess my question, and I know this is such a odd framing, but it's like when you meet a new friend and you see their car, you're like, I've never seen anybody with this car before. And then all of a sudden, because you recognize that car, you're like, oh, this car is everywhere on the road. So like, my question is, am I just crazy that I feel like I'm seeing it more because I'm talking about it more and I'm thinking about it way more? Or like, is there actual movement in the market around the topic? So like that, I'm hesitant to claim that at this early, 8 months in, I've like made that massive of a shift in the market to where other people are talking about it at all?
I mean, it's probably both if I'm being realistically honest, right? Like you know, that phenomenon of like, I'm going to look for red cars and now I see red cars. I'm going to look for
Yeah.
cars that I like. And I couldn't tell you how many cars I saw that I don't care about, but I can tell you the ones I do. So there is that. Like, I am naturally geared toward looking for things that are around distribution first. Oh, we need to have this strategy, da 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 da. I'm sure you're the same with Scrappy ABM. But some of it that's cool too is like, think about the conversations you're having with people who are in your pipeline or who come in as leads. How aware are they that Scrappy ABM is a thing when they're having those, how qualified are they within having those conversations? That's where that macro sort of, stand comes in, where it's like, are we getting more qualified conversations with people who get it, or are people coming in blind with like no clue?
Yeah. And it's an interesting balance on that front because I've largely had my current inbounds. I've had a couple actually that came through organic search that were just like Googling ABM agency. And I was like, I don't know how on earth Scrappy ABM showed up as a one-page website, but neat. And like they closed because we have a very different approach. But again, admittedly, most of the audience that is coming inbound has either been through LinkedIn. So like they know me personally and they've been following me for years. And when I say personally, I don't mean like Justin, you and I have hopped on a couple of calls previously. So like I feel like we know each other personally versus a lot of the people that are coming in, we've never actually hopped on a call previously. They've just like been a like or a comment on like a fair number of posts over the past like 3 or 4 years. So like it's that they know me, and I'm putting that in quotes for anybody that's listening. Like they know the persona, and I want to be clear, It's not like an intentionally defined persona, but the reality is I have a persona that is my online persona. That's pretty real, but like it's impossible to give the full context of a human being through text post on LinkedIn.
Sure.
So like they know a lot, but not everything. And then the other side is just like people that have randomly found me through like I'm doing some webinars with other people. I'm going on podcast interviews. So like they hear the episode and they're like, that's a cool concept. I'm going to go have a conversation. Or they saw me at an event speak. So like they only have the context of a 45-minute conversation. And then they like look at the website and they're like, oh, this is what I thought it was going to be. And then they come in and schedule a call. So it's hard to know because admittedly, there's not like a lot that's just not directly associated with me personally at the moment because everything is like,
which would make sense, I think for where you're at.
So I don't know if that answers the question, but like people are already largely aware and then they meet the same person that they found in the first place in that first call. So they come in with some form of education generally, unless it's a referral and they're trusting somebody else. I have had a number of people that thought I was a technology platform. And I'm like, well, we're actually a service provider. I'm like, so we're probably not the right fit because I'm not a technology. It's me and a few people and some laptops.
Right. I think for you, as we kind of wrap a little bit on, the distribution side, for you, I think the biggest thing I would think through is like, if you did nothing with LinkedIn, I'd actually probably be okay with that. Like you're getting good enough results. You're not seeing success with it and you're not being inconsistent.
Yeah.
And so you're showing up consistently. Now, it may not be as consistently or on the topics or whatever, but that's refinement. Where I would level up, and it sounds like you're going to do that, is on email and understanding like, how do I consistently, or how do we as a team consistently, if I am releasing a podcast, get that in front of that email audience and make sure they know it's here and it's new, especially like you mentioned with podcasts, could be guest shows, definitely with guest shows, because they're probably unaware that you ever were on a guest's podcast.
Yeah.
But for even ones in your feed, I recognize this too. Like I get a lot more listens when I email my list than I do when I don't.
Yeah.
And so it's just the reality, because unless they're scrolling their podcast feed and I come up, or they're subscribed, or it's just podcasts, like you said, they're not super discoverable. And even on LinkedIn, I think it's harder to be like, I'm scrolling my feed. Oh, that's a really good podcast. Like I'm often not going to go straight from LinkedIn to go listen to a full length episode.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so thinking about how you can use email as a, maybe if you're not doing particular things on LinkedIn that you want to be promoting podcast episodes consistently, promoting client wins consistently, maybe that's the channel that you start using with email with, and saying like, LinkedIn, we're going to keep the same until I can figure out a more consistent, different path with that. But for email, every Tuesday, I'm going to create a template, a formulaic sort of like rough guide of like what a podcast promo email looks like. I'm going to create a rough guide for what a client win email looks like. And then if you just did 2 of those a week, now you've got 8 more emails every month that you're sending in front of your audience. Hopefully you're growing that audience as well. It just builds it up.
Yeah. Final question on this front, because I know we got to wrap up, but like, any thoughts around email audience acquisition? Because the hardest part is just like, for me on social, it's easy because like I just connect with people and then they become a follower, or like I just post so much content and enough people engage with it that like I get to second and third level audiences. Whereas email, they have to like either seek you out or like find it somehow and then make the intentional choice to subscribe. So like, what's the strategy for email audience acquisition?
I think and you could crush at this because you're doing so much, is come up with that 1, maybe 2, lead gen, for lack of a better term, but like pieces of content, right? Like maybe it's the Scrappy ABM formula checklist, or, these are all the things that you need in order to create it. Like, what's the thing like after you go on the show that you can just naturally say, go to Scrappy ABM /5 days and you're going to get the 5-day playbook to do a quick thing. Like basically like, or maybe it's you've got these templates and these frameworks, like maybe it's giving away one completely for free as a way to drive emails. And then you're going to build that list up way faster. Same with your podcast, same with your webinars. Hey, before we get started, I just want to let you guys know this year, I want to help you do X, Y, and Z better. In order to do that, I've made this thing. You can get it completely free. It's over here. It's a way to convert those people. It's something I'm going to start to add into my business that I've been definitely lacking on. But I did that last year when I partnered with Rev Genius for their event. And I just had a free sort of customizable webpage that I built out with a freebie. And at the end, I said, hey, if you want to see how this is done, go here and download it. Added probably 50 to 100 people to the list.
Okay. Very cool.
That would be the dead simplest thing. Like if you did one thing, it's build the one, or you already have it built, and then just build like within SendFox, you can build an automation to where after they download this thing, we're going to trigger them with here's your download. And then you can just take that same list and then just send them the podcast promo every week, send them the client win stuff every week, send them the, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
You'll be able to grow your email audience massively if you do that.
Okay. Yeah. I've avoided the lead gen like downloadable asset because I've done enough that were pretty crap, if I'm being honest, in like past lives. But honestly, our content is pretty good. So the thought process was I'd have a dedicated landing page with all the playbooks, and you could put in your email to get updates on new playbooks that come out. But I still kind of want everything to be ungated. I'm working through that strategy of like, what's the balance of ungated versus gated content?
Mm-hmm. And I'm with you. I think some of those things I'm like, has this been overplayed or is this? But dude, I had a problem I'm trying to solve around the membership site I'm building. I watched a bunch of YouTube content from this guy. He has a bunch of good guides within his YouTube content that he points to. I downloaded them. I'm happy. You know what I mean? So It's like, because all the content is high quality and it's not crap. You could do a crap email sequence. You could do crap LinkedIn content. It doesn't really matter.
That's
like
true.
There's good and bad with all those things. So I think for you, like if your head's in the right space of like, let's give them something super valuable, your heart's going to be in the right spot. You want to be giving and, provide a good quality service for those people. And that's only going to help you in the long run.
All right. Well, I got some homework. Thanks, Justin.
Awesome, man. Yeah, no, I'm excited for you. I think if you took away from this and the only thing you did was build out that lead gen or adjust that and then start consistently emailing your list that you continue to grow, your business is just going to boom up because LinkedIn will keep doing well for you. Podcasts will keep doing well for you. And now you've got a own channel that you can communicate with your audience with.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Awesome, man.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. This is a blast. Hopefully it'll help you get cruising. So thanks for coming on, Mason. Appreciate it, dude.
Yeah. Thanks for lovingly tearing me apart.
Absolutely. Anytime. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Distribution First, and thank you for listening all the way through. I appreciate you so much. And I hope you're able to apply what you learned in this episode one way or another into your content strategy as well. Speaking of strategy, we have a lot of things going on this year that are going to help you build your brand, 10x your content, and transform the way you do content marketing. Make sure to subscribe to the show and sign up for my newsletter at justinsimon.co so you don't miss a thing. I look forward to serving you in the next episode as well. And until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.